My presentation will be structured in three parts. First, I'll lay the background in terms of the legal infrastructure where we work at the Great Lakes region, and then we'll speak about sexual orientation and coming out on the plight of the LGBTI refugees. Then I'll speak about the asylum regime and how receptive it has been for LGBTI refugees, especially in the East African context or the Great Lakes region. Most of us who are here know that 38 out of 53 countries in Africa criminalize homosexuality. And there's no, and some states like Somalia and Sudan and a few states in Nigeria punish homosexuality or homosexual acts by death. There's no African country that has taken steps to decriminalize it except South Africa. In the inverse, countries like Burundi have introduced new laws to criminalize homosexuality, and they're still pending. Also, I mentioned the current anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda. What these legislative sanctions do is that they occasion human rights violations across these countries. And most of these violations are characterized by harassment, humiliation, extortion, arbitrary arrest, judicial violence, imprisonment, torture, hate crimes, and sometimes, especially in Somalia, honor killings. So people who live in these countries and are not conforming to the heteronormativity and the gender dichotomy are usually made to flee or to live in invisibility. But in terms of the legal infrastructure, if you compare the laws in this country with the ruling or the interpretation of the United Nations Human Rights Committee in the case of Tuning versus Australia, it said that sex also includes sexual orientation and that any country which is a signatory to the ICCPR cannot go on criminalizing same-sex consent, acts of same-sex sexual contact between consenting adults. So on that premise, all these 38 African countries are at variance with the ICCPR, and 47 out of the 53 African countries have either ratified or signed the ICCPR. Anyway, so as noted above, these countries that criminalize sexual activity, same-sex activities between men usually create a lot of hostility, not just from the legal machinery, but also supported by the political and religious architecture of that society. But even where homosexuality is legal, like in South Africa and Rwanda, societal attitudes are very forbidding and very repressive. And this is manifested by blackmail, murder, and denunciation, with high reported rates of intolerance, especially in Rwanda, and violence, especially in South Africa, by the general population and sometimes by state agents. This has been reported in Rwanda. Social discrimination and exclusion also comes to bear with perceived transgression of social, religious, and cultural morals. It is exemplified in the attempts to cure individuals of homosexuality in Rwanda and corrective rape in countries like Uganda. So what happens is that many self-identifying LGBTI individuals who flee from these countries or from Uganda, Somalia, Sudan, Ethiopia, DRC, Rwanda, and sometimes Burundi, they find no relief in their countries which are hosting them, like Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda, because these same countries mirror the same legislative and societal attitudes as there are in their countries of origin. And in countries like Uganda, where every refugee is supposed to go through the office of the Prime Minister and the CID department to register as a refugee, it is very highly unlikely that if you're fleeing from a country like Rwanda because of your sexual orientation, that you go to the CID department and say that you're fleeing Rwanda because you're being persecuted on account of your sexual orientation. So most LGBTI persons who are in flight, they do not cite their sexuality as a primary reason for their flights and their refugee claim. Instead, they allude to political, social, and ethnic issues as a cause of their insecurity. And in most of these host countries, especially Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania, which are the biggest receptors or host of refugees in the Great Lakes region, these countries do not interpret the 1952 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees to grant a refugee mandate on account of persecution because of sexual orientation or gender identity. They have absolutely refused to apply the 1993 advisory opinion by the UNHCR that says that homosexuals can be covered for by the element of membership to a particular social group. So in the interim, pervasive homophobia in these countries of asylum, the host countries, sanctioned by homophobic rhetoric by religious and the political elites, have forced the LGBTI refugees to live in the extreme margins of society. And this exclusion presents livelihood challenges, with many being forced into survival sex, as my colleague exemplified earlier. If you look at the asylum regime, while most refugee agencies, especially in Kenya and Uganda, while they do offer assistance and protection for refugees, LGBTI refugees cannot rely on this system of protection because the security mechanisms frequently embody the same homophobic attitudes which exist in the countries of origin and asylum. There have been very, very many accounts where refugees, especially gay refugees, would walk to offices in some organizations in Nairobi seeking services, and they'll be referred to our office in Nairobi, and the referral form says that this client is a homosexual and is being referred to your organization for curative therapy. Not for protection, but for curative therapy. So such homophobic attitude, they traverses not only the society, but they also exist within the asylum regime, making it very difficult for sexual minority refugees and asylum seekers to assess the assistance, protection, and the solutions that would address their plight. The program that we run in East Africa operates against a background of pervasive homophobia in the African continent and a lot of hostility and repression, and sometimes forces a lot of our clients to be invisible in the asylum statistics. But while homophobia has been a phenomenon that has been going on for such a long time, it has started gaining recognition in the global regime. Rachel, who has been my colleague in advocacy at the UN level, will tell you that only in 2008 did the UNHCR issue guidance note pertaining to protection of refugees who are facing persecution on account of sexual orientation and gender identity. But there's still need for more efforts in terms of advocacy to be done at a global level for the asylum regime. My understanding, and this is something that was admitted by the UN officials when we were doing the annual consultations last week, they said that the UNHCR still need a lot of training to up their skills in terms of best practices and shift of attitude when it comes to serving LGBTI refugees, because they're very ill-equipped as of now, and especially in the African context. I remember from my experience, last month I was supposed to facilitate a training for the UNHCR in Uganda, the Ugandan office, and this did not take off first because of the perceived attitudes that would have been picked up by some of the national staff, considering that just a month ago Uganda was debating the anti-homosexuality bill, so the political conditions are not that much conducive. So, due to the forced invisibility of LGBTI refugees, there is a systematic denial of their existence, especially in East Africa. When you speak about LGBTI refugees, especially NGO partners, they'll ask you, where are they? Why have they not come out so they can be assisted? And there's a consequent blindness to their plight and the special protection and assistance needs that they have. So without targeted sensitization and protection training focused on the particular plight of LGBTI refugees and the applicable standards in terms of the universal application of rights for all without distinction, then the needs of LGBTI refugees risk being or going unmet. There are no statistics to the number of LGBTI refugees so far, especially at the global level. Most of us know that only last month did we see a very, very recent awakening of the responsibility of the UN to protect LGBTI persons, especially in countries where there's a lot of repression. However, LGBTI refugees are still and are often at heightened risk and fall within one of the most underserved cluster of refugees. They have multiple vulnerabilities because one, they're not only refugees, but they're sexual minorities in countries which have oppressive laws. And there's need to create safer environments for them within the refugee assisting agencies. There's also need to engage with main civil societies to fight for the decriminalization of homosexuality in Africa. We also need to engage our civic leaders more, and do a lot of civic education with communities. And we also need to keep lobbying and engaging for legal and policy reform. Thank you.